The Extraordinary Phenomenon Investigations Council presents Epic Voyages. Come join us as we enter and experience the great mysteries of the world with tonight's host,
Christine Dickey.
Thank you for joining Epic Voyagers, courtesy of Inception Radio. My name is Christine Dickey. I'm the Epic Voyagers State Director for Arizona and Senior Director. I'm your host for tonight's program. My guest this evening is one of the true greats in pioneering of UFO research, Dr. R. Leo Sprinkle. Dr. Sprinkle studied at the University of Colorado and received his PhD from the University of Missouri. Dr. Sprinkle has authored and co-authored 48 articles on the UFO phenomena and its implications on the human psyche. He began the Rocky Mountain UFO Conference, held early from 1980 to about 2001 at the University of Wyoming at Laramie, where he was professor of counseling and testing. Along with his wife Marilyn, he conducted regression workshops as well as individual sessions on regression hypnotherapy for UFO experiencers. Dr. Sprinkle appeared before Congress in 1968, where he submitted a paper on the UFO phenomenon and its effect on the human population. Dr. Sprinkle still sees clients on an appointment basis at his office in Laramie. Tonight, Dr. Sprinkle will be discussing some new cases as well as touch on some old cases that have intrigued many over the years. So without further delay, please welcome Dr. Leo Sprinkle. Leo, great to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk with you.
When we talked earlier this week on the phone, you wanted to touch on some of the older cases, and also you told me you have some new cases, interesting cases to talk about. And I'm going to let you go start in where you feel most comfortable and go from there. Go ahead.
Okay. Sure. It's been a pleasure to work with so many people over the years. For some people, they get excited to hear that I was on a 1966 TV program in New York City with various well-known scientists, including Dr. Carl Sagan. And that's always exciting. But also, the real pleasure for me is working with people who have had the ET encounters and who are willing to discuss the implications. Just for example, most recently, I've been corresponding with a woman named Trish Gullett, who lives in Florida, and she's writing a book about her experiences. And Dr. Evelyn Fuqua is writing another book about her experiences. Probably that'll be published this year. Her name now is Evelyn Fuqua Cook, and the book is Cosmic Relationships. Some people, of course, are not only puzzled by their ET encounters, but they're also frightened or angry. I can remember years ago I was working with a woman who was describing during the hypnosis session her memories of being on board a craft and being poked and prodded by the examiners. And when she came back to the normal state, she looked at me with fear in her eyes. She said, "Leo, do you think they're going to come and take me away?" And I said, "No, I don't think you'll be that lucky. I think you'll have to stay and work like the rest of us." And she kind of laughed because she realized after some years that the examination or the encounters are not the important work, just like someone who goes to basic training in the Army, the encounters with the medics or the encounters with the training staff is not the important work. Sometimes recruits think that the sergeant is giving them a bad time, but that's just to prepare them for their work. And so my own view is that many people go through what they feel is the rough stuff is actually a training program.
Interesting thought. Yeah.
And when they learn that, then they can realize it's a long-range process, and some people feel like it's been a many-lifetime process, that at the soul level they remember having come from other planets, other civilizations, coming to Earth, living several lifetimes, and then helping humanity to get to this point of transformation. This is an important year, according to many people, because they feel like it's an end of the old age and the beginning of the Aquarian age. So these are exciting times.
Leo, I have a question. What got you started in the first place? What got you interested in the UFO phenomenon?
It was my own experiences. As a child, I had encounters, although at that time I wasn't sure exactly what was going on. It was when I was a 10-year-old kid in 1940. I didn't know if these were dreams or on-board experiences. So as a psychology student, well, I thought, okay, maybe it's just a dream, but I'll learn more about it. Then when I was a college student, a buddy and I saw a flying saucer in 1949 at the University of Colorado in Boulder. I'd been skeptical about people who in 1947 were claiming sightings, and the Roswell incident, I wasn't sure about that. So my buddy and I, after we listened to a visiting professor talk about general semantics, or the way scientists talk, we were playing a game. We say we were walking along the campus. We'd come out of the Arts and Science building, and we were playing this game of visualization and naming what was going on. They said, "What do you see over there?" "Well, I call it a tree." "Well, how do you describe it?" "Well, it has a trunk, it has branches, it has limbs, it has twigs, it has leaves. I think it has roots, but I can't see them because they're underground." And so we were being little scientists in our minds. And then we looked over to the southwest corner of the sky, and we said, "What do we see over there?" Well, to me it looked like an elliptical object. Didn't look like an airplane or a balloon. In the setting sun, there was a reflection on the edge of the object. I didn't know if it was the glint off the sun or if it was an internal locus. He and I talked about it, Joe and I, but we didn't really want to talk to anybody else because seeing a flying saucer, that was weird. We estimated that it was about the size of, the apparent size of a fingernail at arm's length. And of course, this is the typical view that people have, something about 500 yards away, so that skeptics or people who weren't there can say, "Well, you misunderstood," or, "you're crazy," or whatever. So I didn't want to talk much about it. But in 1956, my wife and I was a graduate student after coming back to Colorado from Germany in the Army. My wife and I saw a light over the Flatirons, or the Rocky Mountain foothills. That was in 56, the summer. It looked red and glowing, and then it began to move. And so I stopped the car, we got out. We watched while the light or the object or whatever it was apparently descended, because now it was between us and the Flatirons, whereas before I thought of it as an evening star or a planet. We watched for several minutes in the dusk as the object would hover, and then it would move, and then it would hover, and then it would move. And I saw car lights down below. I heard horns. I assumed other people were watching what we were watching. And so I said, okay. As it disappeared to the north, I said, tomorrow I'll read the newspaper or listen to the radio, find out what it was. There was nothing on it, and I had a sinking feeling in my guts that, uh-oh, this is important, and I'm going to have to study the phenomenon, but it's going to be lonely business, because I knew that after two sightings, I could no longer claim that I was mistaken. It was something that was true, and then of course my childhood memories began to wander, and so many years later, after I learned hypnotic techniques and finished the doctoral studies, many years later I asked a psychologist to help me go through. So age 50, I finally went back to age 10 and learned I was on board a craft, and the tall guy on my left was saying to me, "Leo, learn to read and write well. When you grow up, you can help other people learn more about their purpose in life." And so that became my guideline, not only helping people come to terms with their UFO experience, but also come to terms with whether they wish to talk about it publicly or whether they don't. And that's why we developed, finally in 1980, a conference where people could come and not only listen to, quote, experts, unquote, but listen to the true experts, the people who had had the experience, so that they would be given an opportunity to stand up before other people and talk about their experience.
What do you think, of all the cases that you've been exposed to, what do you think has been the ultimate, the biggest, the most incredible hands-on case you've worked with?
Well, for many people, it's the glory of seeing an object, shining lights and meeting the ETs and so on. But for me, it's the effect upon the people. Just for example, Ida Kannenberg, she's deceased now, but
right.
She was in her 80s when she was writing several books. She wrote a half a dozen books about her experiences, including one called How to Deal with Your UFO Alien Encounter. She was a quiet lady, but she was also tough-minded. When she first started talking about her experiences, she would kind of kid herself, and she felt like she was being observed, monitored by extraterrestrials. And so when she'd take a shower, she'd close her eyes so they couldn't see what was going on. And she complained about their intrusiveness in her life. She wasn't one to take things lightly or to be dismissive of herself. She was willing to argue with the ETs, but after a while she found out that she was serving as a messenger. And that's what most people, if they stick with it, some people say to hell with it, and they either go crazy or get drunk or don't talk about their experience. But if a person will stick with it, then eventually they'll find out that they are not only coming from a family of experiences, but also finding out that they have some kind of a message. Now, it may be like one woman who came to our conference. She sat there in the back and didn't say anything the first year. The second year, she timidly spoke about her experiences. And then when she left, she and her family had a UFO flying saucer right overhead of their truck when they went back to Colorado. Third year, she came back, and she was now a little messenger in her community. She'd have a coffee hour, and people would come and sit in her kitchen and talk about their experiences. So it wasn't a big deal as far as, writing a book or going on TV or whatever, but it was served as a communication center for her neighborhood. So some people feel like they have to talk to others. Some people feel like they serve as a parent or as a teacher or a nurse. Most people are concerned about the planet environment. Most people seem to be concerned about animals and plants, but the main theme seems to be one of serving others.
I agree. Well, I know you've had some experience with the cattle mutilation business, and perhaps an implication of I'm trying to say it correctly. There's a connection between the Greys and the cattle mutilation and the need for the hemoglobin. What is What is your take on the cattle mutilations, and why do you think it's occurring?
I've heard various theories, and I've worked with various people. As you know, when you were living in Laramie,
Right.
Pat McGuire had mutilation at his ranch. I remember that year that I met Pat McGuire, I had been asked to go out to Nevada and talk with a man who had had strange encounters, and also work with other people. And then I came back, and right here in Laramie, it was one of the most interesting cases where he was describing what was going on in his ranch. So I called him, and we made arrangements for me to go out there and talk. It's a puzzle, like most things, the crop circles, the cattle mutilations, the psychic messages. Some people wake up the same time each night or early morning as their encounter, and it's a question mark about what is the basic theme. For me, the two basic themes are good guy, bad guy, or good cop, bad cop. The one theme, good guy, bad guy, means that there are ETs who are employing some of the humans to serve as the bosses of the rest of us, so that there's an elite, whether you think of them as money or greed or political control, who are in charge of the planet and keeping the rest of us as prisoners. So that's some people argue that point of view. So that there's a battle going on between the good ETs and the bad ETs, and the question is how will that turn out. The other scenario, which intrigues me, is the good cop, bad cop. If, for example, I got a letter from a man recently in a Midwestern state, and he was telling me he appreciated my willingness to correspond with him, and he thanked me for sending him some materials. But he said he wouldn't agree with me about the ETs. He said, if you think of a neighbor coming in to your home and abducting him and examining him, well, that's not a good neighbor. That's hostile. And so when I wrote back to him, I said, well, let's look at another scenario. What if I'm a patriarch and an extreme patriarch? What if I have guns and drugs? What if I'm not only protecting women and children, but what if I'm possessing women and children? What if I am exploiting animals? What if I am living in a house that's got polluted air, and now I'm gasping for breath, and my neighbor comes over and applies CPR? Is he helping me or is he hurting me? I don't know what he'll say. Maybe he'll write back and comment on it. But this scenario would suggest that ETs are a mirror, so that they are mirroring who we are. We're the ones who have guns and drugs. We're the ones who are trying to take weapons out into space. We're the ones who are killing each other and possessing women and children and pushing them around, as well as exploiting the animals and the plants on the planet. So if that's a possible scenario, then the question is, when a person faces an ET, is that person facing an evil monster, or is that person facing a teacher who's using tough tactics to get us to shape up?
Interesting theory, really is.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to ask you a question that's been perplexing me for many years.
Oh, okay.
And you'll know what I'm talking about here. When a person has a close encounter and they see an object before them, maybe it's landed on the ground and they see it there, and they're staring at it and they're thinking how interesting or how frightening or whatever they happen to be feeling, and all of a sudden they're inside talking to people, and all of a sudden they're back outside looking at the thing again. What is going on in the human psyche at that point that would cause a person to remember parts of a experience in not other parts? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Right, yeah. It's a good question, and I don't know if I know the answer for everybody, because some people feel like they have a physical experience, that they are physically, biologically, as a body, they're on the craft and talking with the ET, being shown the inside. Other people feel like they are remembering something that was not a physical experience, but was a psychic experience. For example, like a person had an out-of-body experience, and the spirit was in the craft, and the body was still in bed or in the apartment or the house. Other people feel like they've been programmed, like they have been shown something. Not that it necessarily happened to them, but that it was like inserted into their memory banks. So some people see it as a physical experience, some people see it as a psychic experience, and some people see it as an insertion or something that didn't happen but was shown to them. Just like if I were reading a book and open the page and there's a note from somebody else, I didn't put it there, but it's information. So what I suggest when I talk with people is if they can be less afraid. Of course, some people are frightened, and so it's difficult for them to know what options are available. But if they can think about the possibility of how did they get that information and what to do with it. That just give you one example. When I was talking to Bud Hopkins years ago at a conference, he was setting up a slideshow, and he and I were talking. We liked one another, but we disagreed over what was going on. He thought of the ETs as invaders and wasn't sure whether they were as intruders, and he wasn't sure if they were what Dr. Jacobs called invaders. So he tried to keep a middle ground between invaders on the one hand and instructors on the other hand, and he thought of them as intruders. And he was trying to educate me, and he showed me a letter, and he said, "Look, Leo, here's a letter from a woman. Look at these stains. These are tear stains. This woman is hurt. She's upset. She didn't ask to be abducted. She's miserable." And he tried to get me to understand that my benign, silly, fuzzy-minded view of the ETs was wrong. And I looked at the letter and I said, "Yeah, I think you're right, Bud. I think these are tear stains, and I think the woman is crying. And yet, look what she's crying about. She wrote in the letter that she was sitting watching a TV program, and she was watching these scientists who were putting darts into a little baby seal to paralyze the seal so they could weigh it and measure it. And I said, did the baby seal ask to be abducted? Did the baby seal ask to be examined?" And he looked at me, he said, "You don't understand." And I said, "Yeah, I suppose you're right." But what if the ETs were showing her what we as humans are doing to animals on the planet? If that were the case, then she could have the attitude, if she chooses, to be concerned about animals just as she wants people to be concerned about her and the way the ETs are treating her. So to me, it's a possibility that the UFO phenomenon is a mirror. And in one of the chapters of the book I wrote, Soul Samples, in 99, I have a chapter on speculation. And I suggest to people who are interested to look at the phenomenon. If they remember that they saw a flying saucer during the day, then say, okay, what was this flying saucer doing? What was I doing? What's the space? What's the time? What's the activity? What's my rumination? So some people feel like they're supposed to look at the object as if it was their soul and their task. And some people see the object at night, and so they think that it's covered. It's in the darkness. It's not brought out to the light yet. So just like a person could analyze a dream, a person could analyze his or her UFO experience.
Leo, I have a question. Of all the people in the UFO world, besides yourself, one of the ones I admire the most is Zecharia Sitchin. And I have to tell you, his books really hit home for me, especially after, my encounter up in Wyoming.
Yeah.
His books, I mean, that was the answer for me. I knew who they were at that point, and I wanted to know, what do you feel about 2012? What do you feel about this Planet X, Nibiru, the Anunnaki? Do you have a feel for that?
Yeah, I'm very interested. There's another book by Philip Coppens on the ancient alien question. He's somewhat skeptical of any approach, including Sitchin.
Uh-huh.
The book that intrigues me the most in that field is not only Sitchin and not only Clarfeld. He's written about the pyramids and about the scrolls and the physical evidence, and argues that that's a definite indication that we not only have been visited for thousands of years, that we came about as a result of the ancient aliens.
Yes.
And I like that theory, because the ancient Bible and all the legends of the Native Americans and the Chinese and others around the planet. One book that is intriguing is by a guy named Scranton. Scranton doesn't describe himself as an anthropologist or a archaeologist. He thinks of himself as a computer geek, and but what he's done is he's searched the area around the Atlantis civilization, the Canary Islands, the Dogon,
right.
In Africa. In fact, he has a book on the science of the Dogon, or in Peru, or the Cherokee tribes and the other Native Americans.
Uh-huh.
All around that area, his research